Good morning, good morning, good morning. Pardon my twist, just getting up, but I had a great period of rest last night. So I'm gonna hop into this today early and try to knock out this chapter. Hope you bear with me. Hope your today is great and your tomorrow is greater. And I'm letting you know fortune favors you. So when you walk out today, man, you walk out in that belief and that light within yourself and let God shine through. You feel me? Um, if you haven't gotten a subscription, only $5 to Netflix, one of the largest collections of conscious material. And when I say conscious, I don't just mean lectures. There's recipes on there, and there's going to be more that's going to be added. But this is something that we all need to embrace because this is our collection. We have access to a variety of things that you may not find anywhere else. So www.kmtflix.com, Cometflix.com. Grab your subscription, see what it's about. It's only $5 a month. We gotta support our own. If you need any sweatshirts, t-shirts, holla at me. I got them. I got them on deck. And if I don't, they on the way. But 9 out of 10, I got them on deck. Jewelry on deck, watches, um, bracelets, necklaces, earrings on deck. What else? For those of you that are actually close to me, related to me, or friends of mine, like we actually know each other, because the majority of people that I know on social media, specifically on Facebook, I know you, I met you, we've talked in person, right? There was two posts that I put up that were very important yesterday, and they really sort of rubbed off on one another. They really touched a lot of ground, and you ain't have to hear it from a brother. You can hear it from the sisters, from the queens, right? Proud of myself. That's my lamp. What was the other one? Oh yeah, so I don't know the one sister's name, but under the video it states, "Where's the good men at, sis?" She went ham, and the information wasn't just for the sisters though. It was also for the brothers. You know what? I like that that light went out. I got to get a new one that blew out. I didn't have that light on for like 2 months. I cut it off like once, like a week or two ago. What was the other one? Oh, and my girl Michi X. Listen, if you don't know Michi X, see, I listen to Fly Nubian Queen because there's good information. You got to know what to take from certain people. There's good information that Dr. Watkins give, and there's some information that he plays around with. I don't participate with. When we talking about the black man or woman, a lot of my friends, y'all rap, right? And mind you, I'm 42. I don't feel like if you're 42, you should be rapping about bricks, cracking nobody's head open. None of that. Not for public use. Why? Because if we not building, what we doing? The music they allow us to listen to is the music that's been destroying our subconscious all this time. We quit the mollywop someone that look like us. But when these police killing us or treating us wrong, not a gang member, not none of these so-called G's did nothing. You tell me if I'm wrong. Show me where you see it. Y'all see what's going on in parchment prisons in Mississippi? That's going on in prisons all over the country. They got our children, excuse me, they got our men, women, and children locked up. Most of them locked up for stuff that they didn't even do, or they sentenced them as an adult and they were kids. I got a brother that has spent more time in prison than he ever had on the streets. They've denied him parole 3 times in a row. 2 year hit, 18-month hit, a year hit, and he got 20, almost 24 years in. The crime he committed when he was 17. I'm not saying people don't need to be punished, but what I am saying is mass incarceration is the reason why 70% of our male population is incarcerated. And it began the day they ended slavery. Oh yeah, we came with they came with Jim Crow and all of that. But your president, your Clintons, yeah, they did that. They locked up more black people than anybody. Democrats and Republicans play for the same team. They eat and frequent the same places. They just say that they on different sides. But when it come down to the come down, you ain't seen not a nan politician create a law to protect black people specifically, not share with anyone else, because ain't nobody else endured that torture that we endured for the years that we've endured. right? Now I'm gonna hop off of that and I'm gonna get into this, but listen to me. Michi X, she on to something with that black agenda, and she one of the few people that I see doing this sincerely. So I urge you to go and check out the sister and see what she's talking about. None of us are perfect, but at the end of the day, it's a lot going on. That war they talking about ain't got nothing to do with me. That Iran ain't got nothing to do with us. And right now, we need to be focused on us because the ball is in our court now, and it's time for us. We've been waiting on people. People been waiting on their God to come back or to wipe out their enemies. I ain't waiting on nobody to do nothing that I can do for my motherfucker self. Period. And you shouldn't either. You got to dig deep within yourself, man. This cognitive dissonance is a motherfucker, man. For real, for real. So listen, I'm gonna hop into this chapter and it's speaking about 18th century rationale, right? But I do want you to check those two pieces of information out. Also, there was a post by my brother Lion and see what he said because he never coming up with words. You know what I mean? On February 1st, we'll be at the Juneteenth headquarters. We'll have another convention, the Black Buffalo Convention. If you're concerned about what's going on in your community and all of that, man, we ain't got to go to the churches. You ain't see the churches standing out here doing nothing. They ain't doing nothing for nobody. They buying up property, man, and getting that money from the 501c, man. That's what they about, man. They pimping the community. They've been doing. 14 million going to the church every Sunday throughout the so-called United States, right? How much of that money is coming back to the community? Where are our banks? Where are our hospitals? You know what I'm saying? Like, where are our own schools? Where are our grocery stores? And I'm talking about this has been going on for hundreds of years. And at what point is we going to stop? Because it got to stop. If we're not going to do it collectively for the whole, what are we doing? We can't keep giving our power to the same people that oppressed us. And the people that oppress us are never, they'll never do it so that we can be, they'll never do something to make sure that we're free and we're treated equal. That ain't their job. It's our job. And if you want that, man, you got to go and get it. You can't sit and wait. We need everybody to do their part. Nah, everybody ain't going to be on the front line. Everybody ain't a politician. But everybody has a concern. Every single one of us has some concerns, right? So check that information out. I'm going to get into this reading and share. That's all I can ask, right? So give me a moment. Let me share the social media as I always do. Cool. Okay. Ooh. Okay, so we got that going. Let me go over here to get this going, right? Just give me a moment. Go grab your coffee. It's gonna be a while. Hopefully you in your car. And part of my language if you got children, because I don't call them kids. You know, I'm doing my best not to call them kids. I'm just realizing that I know there's only one group of people called children, kids. And they do it in a specific manner. Because initially, kids mean baby ghosts. We ain't got no kids, we have children. Right? This is a big ol' live. just trying to put it up here because I don't see nobody doing it, so I'm gonna do it because this is what I do, right? 18th century rationale. Pardon me. What's good? All right. So 18th century rationale out of post-traumatic slavery syndrome. The answer begins with the preeminent sweetest biological scientist of the 18th century, Carl Curulus Linnaeus, Linnaeus, 1707 to 1778. Some of you may remember from your high school or college biology class. He laid the groundwork for the taxonomic system we use today to classify all plants and animals: kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. Using his system, we are able to know every living thing's relation to all other living things. Thanks to Linnaeus, we can know the place of each kind of plant and animal we find on Earth. Cows and oxen are bovines. Douglas firs, giant sequoias, and redwoods are conifers. Panthers, tigers, jaguars, and leopards are felines. All bovines and felines are mammals, and so forth. Linnaeus also delineated the characteristics that made each life form fall into each group. His system was based totally on observations of an organism's physical characteristics. It was a truly impressive and valuable achievement. The problem was he went too far. He expanded his system to try to account for different types of humans, and unlike all his previous work, his classifications for humans used considerably fewer objective descriptors. With this highly suspect effort to classify humans, Linnaeus began the science of anthropology and laid the foundation for 19th century beliefs about race that resulted in racism. In the Systema Naturae, he set forth this race classification system using skin color as a criterion for classifying races, while also assigning moral and intellectual capacities to each race. These concepts became a permanent part of the 19th century anthropological thought and language. According to Haller in his book Outcast from Evolution, Linnaeus describes Homo americanus as reddish, choleric, obstinate, contented, and regulated by custom. Homo Eurapus as white, fickle, sanguine, blue-eyed, gentle, and governed by laws. Homo Asiaticus as sallow, grave, dignified, avaricious or varicose, and ruled by opinion. And Homo Afer as black, phlegmatic, cunning, lazy, lustful, careless, and governed by caprice. Of course, it is not hard to figure out whom he is describing. Now let's go back to our definitions. Linnaeus was a preeminent scientist. Did any of these descriptions have anything to do with science? Were any experiments designed to see if his observations were correct? Did he have any intention to design experiments to test them? Do any of them have any basis in fact or truth? The answer is a resounding no. While important work was being done in anthropology at the time, the field was full of unqualified amateurs and bigoted people promoting their wild theories concerning the true nature of man. Linnaeus was among them, and moreover, his flawed theories gained attention and influence. Nell Irvin Painter, in The History of White People, sheds further light of Linnaeus when she describes his pitiable and deficient education, which gave pseudoscientists plenty of room to promote his specious assertions about race classification. Linnaeus, after 1 week, received his PhD for a 13-page dissertation from the Dutch University of Harderwijk, which one historian of science designated as a mail order institution. The University of Harderwijk was known for selling degrees. In fact, in the Netherlands, when a person's scientific knowledge is questionable, it is common to say that he or she must be from the University of Harderwijk. So Linnaeus was just expressing his opinions. Maybe he actually believed them, yet we know that belief does not make a thing true. None of his observations, other than perhaps the humans that have different skin pigmentation, have any basis in fact or truth. They really cannot even be considered so much as a theory. The trouble was what he wrote. The trouble was that he wrote them in his book as if they were facts and truths, and others believed him. Linnaeus's misguided opinions provided the backdrop for other researchers to develop their theories of race classification. The German scientist Johann Friedrich Blumenbach from 1752 to 1840, in his treatise on the natural variety of mankind, developed his own system of classification, grouping man into the categories of Caucasian, Mongolian, American, Ethiopian, and Malayan races. As Haller relates, while Linnaeus founded his classificatory system principally upon skin color, Blumenbach considered a combination of color, hair, skull, and facial characteristics as a fundamental means for classifying the five varieties of man. Central to his study was the Caucasian, a term which he originated. He took the name from Mount Caucasus because its southern slope cradled what he felt to be the most beautiful race of men, the Georgian, the Caucasus near Mount Ararat, upon which the biblical ark came to rest after the flood, seemed the most appropriate source for the original race of man. Haller goes on to quote Blumenbach. For in the first place, the stock displays, as we have seen, the most beautiful form of the skull, from which, as a mean and primeval type, the others diverge by most easy gradations on both sides to the two extremes. That is, on the one side, the Mongolian, on the other, the Ethiopian. Besides, it is white in color, which we may fairly assume to have been the primitive color of mankind. Blumenbach, like Linnaeus before him, lacked adequate education and training, yet his work also gained prominence. Blumenbach received his medical degree from the University of Göttingen after submitting his 15-page long dissertation, the result of 1 year's study with an older professor who owned an extraordinarily large and disordered natural history collection of skulls. Blumenbach, along with scientific racists of Britain and the United States, began to rank facial characteristics and skin color hierarchically, beginning, not surprisingly, with white as superior and most beautiful, thus identifying beauty as a scientific category. Painter further explains that during ancient times, the notion of race did not exist, and that not until the 18th century did an obsession with whiteness flourished, with the German invention of the notion of Caucasian beauty. Blumenbach led the way to the construction of the concept of whiteness and white beauty that galvanized beliefs about white supremacy and the legitimacy of white domination. Were there white people in antiquity? People with light skin certainly existed well before our own times, but did anyone think they were white or that their character related to their color? No, for neither the idea of race nor the idea of white people have been invented, and people's skin color did not carry useful meaning. For determined racists, especially in the 20th century, racial identity and language had to coincide, and appearance would always figure in concepts of race. Race begat beauty, and even scientists succumbed to desire. With the concept of human beauty as a scientifically certified racial trait, we come to a crucial turning point in the history of white people. So Blumenbach was also just expressing his opinions. Perhaps he also actually believed what he wrote, like Linnaeus. None of his observations had any basis in fact, nor did they meet the standard for being considered a theory. The trouble was he, like his predecessor, wrote them as if they were facts and truths, and those who needed to assuage their guilt took his and Linnaeus's work as gospel. Despite the fact that both Linnaeus and Blumenbach had failed to produce a shred of scientific evidence to support their opinions, their ideas continue to be referenced in scientific communities throughout the Western world. Given the widespread dissemination of these fallacious beliefs, it is not difficult to understand why belief in racial superiority took root in the 18th century and continues to exist today. Africans were among the many civilizations around the world who do not live up to European standards, and so were considered inferior. They were inferior first because they were not European, and second because they were not Christian. Thus, Africans were viewed as impure, irreligious, and uncivilized, fit to be slaves. In America, these efforts to prove whites superior to blacks continued into the grand European tradition. As documented in the Portable Thomas Jefferson Notes on the State of Virginia by M. Peterson, Jefferson, considered one of the most learned men of this era, expressed disdain and contempt for blacks, stating that they smelled bad and were physically unattractive, required less sleep, were dumb, cowardly, and incapable of feeling relief. In his attempt to justify slavery, he went on to write, "It is not against experience to suppose that different species of the same genus or varieties of the same species may possess different qualifications. Well, not a lover of natural history, then, one who views the gradations in all races of animals with the eye of philosophy, excuse an effort to keep those in the department of a man as distinct as nature has formed them? This unfortunate difference of color and perhaps of faculty is a powerful obstacle of the emancipation of these people." Finally, concluding, "Advance it therefore as a suspicion only that blacks, whether originally a distinct race or made distinct by time and circumstances, are inferior to the whites in the endowments of body and mind." Contrary to his doubts, Jefferson's feelings on this matter were so strong that he suggested that blacks be removed from any possible contact with whites, lest the race be tainted. Among the Romans, emancipation required but one effort: the slave, when made free, might mix with, without staining the blood of the master. But with us, a second is necessary, unknown to history. When freed, he is to be removed beyond the reach of mixture. Other founding fathers expressed similar views as to the status of blacks. James Madison, framer of our Constitution, viewed slaves as inhabitants, but as debased by servitude below the equal level of free inhabitants, which regards the slave as divested of 2/5 of the man. Further efforts to dehumanize those brought here from Africa were written in the law. The Virgin Code of 1705 removed criminal consequences for killing an enslaved person in the act of correcting them. And if any slave resists his master or owner or other person by his or her order correcting such slave and shall happen to be killed in such correction, it shall be accounted a felony. But the master, owner, and every such person so giving correction shall be free and acquit of all punishment and accusation for the same, as if such accident had never happened. The Virginia Code, also referred to as the Casual Killing Act, demonstrated that the enslaved lacked even the most basic protection under the law, the right of self-preservation. A similar bill enacted in Jackson, Mississippi, remained on the books until 1985, when, much to the embarrassment of the Mississippi legislature, it was discovered and voted out. And the efforts to prove superiority continued. Slavery produced or supported a white ethnocentric model, which was justified by an erroneous belief in colorism, the legal assumption that a colored person is a slave. Life was viewed as being part of a chain that ascended from the lowest to the highest order. Such an analysis, together with the Aristotelian notion of the nature of the natural slave, and finally the perversion of the so-called curse of Ham in Christianity, raised and answered the crucial question for Southern whites, at least by the 19th century: which race of people were natural slaves? This point of view further cemented white supremacy as the desired model and culture of African Americans as the subhuman underclass. In 1858, T.R.R. Cobb asserted, "This inquiry into the physical, mental, and moral development of the Negro race seems to point them clearly as peculiarly fitted for a laborious class. Their physical frame is capable of great and long exertion. Their mental capacity renders them incapable of successful development and yet adapts them from the direction of wiser race. Their moral character renders them happy, peaceful, contented, and cheerful in a status that will break the spirit and destroy the energies of the Caucasian or the Native American." Atta Benga. Let me let you see this picture too. See that? Atta Benga or Ota Benga. The little known story of Atta Benga, a 22-year-old Congolese man, was placed in the Bronx Zoo and billed as the missing link in 1906, provides perhaps the most reprehensible examples of dehumanization in recent history. The Bronx Zoo continued to hold Ota Benga captive despite his constant attempts to fight back and in spite of public protests demanding that he be released. I want to say, do any of you know that Louis Vuitton also had a zoo where they dehumanized black people? But that's another story for another time. Let's get back to this. The Bronx Zoo continued to hold Walter Benga captive despite his constant attempts to fight back in spite of public protests demanding that he be released. Madison Grant was an attorney that lobbied to have Otobenga placed on display alongside apes at the Bronx Zoo. Grant, a strong proponent of scientific racism, is best known for his work in conservation and eugenics. Ironically, while he dedicated much of his life to the preservation of wildlife, including the preservation of the redwood forest, different species of deer and antelope, and even sea life, he believed that certain races of humans needed to be reduced or eliminated altogether, namely Jews, Mexicans, and African Americans, along with the sick and disabled. His book, The Passing of the Great Race, suited to be the most famous book on scientific racism ever written, would win him the praise of Adolf Hitler, who stated, "This book is my Bible." Grant believed strongly in forced sterilization and was instrumental in the enactment of strong immigration restrictions and anti-miscegenation laws in the United States, citing the dangers of inferior races outbreeding or mixed breeding with the whites. In 1906, as secretary of the New York Zoological Society, he wrote in defense of the depiction of Benga as a lesser human, an editorial in the New York Times that stated the following: "We do not quite understand all the emotion which others are expressing in the matter. It is absurd to make a moan over the imagined humiliation and degradation Benga is suffering. The pygmies are very low on the human scale, and the suggestion that Benga should be in a school instead of a cage ignores the high probability that school would be a place from which he could draw no advantage whatever. The idea that men are all much alike except as they have had or lacked opportunities for getting an education out of books is now far out of date." Otobenga was eventually released on March 20th, 1916. He died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. What is perhaps even more startling to learn is that there were human zoos throughout Europe, but somehow this information that is by no means unknown or obscure has never managed to reach our American textbooks. In the 1900s, until as late as 1958, people of color, often Africans and Native Americans, were placed in zoos and put on public display for visitors to observe. That was up to 1958. Do you know that they were still finding people that were slaves into the 60s, into the 1960s, literally like 50 years ago? So we ain't came far from this 400 years of oppression and this white slavery. But don't forget that we already were being enslaved by the Arabs prior to that for thousands of years, and they're still doing it. Phrenology, Phrenology. Don't know what that is. First time I ever heard of it. I like it. I like the term because I never heard of it. I don't know what it means, but we're going to find out. By the mid 1800s, the effort to scientifically prove white superiority had support from another theoretic front, the science of phrenology. Phrenology's adherents claimed you could discover much about a person by examining his or her skull. Okay, I don't like phrenology. That's what it is. Okay. Phrenologists believe the bumps on the skull coincided with brain development, and so, through careful examination, one could draw conclusions about an individual's intellect and personality. As you might imagine, some of these scientists use this discipline to classify groups of people in order of intelligence. For instance, in 1859, phrenologist O.L. and L.N. Fowler wrote, "The various races also accord with phrenology." This is hard to pronounce for me. Phrenological science. Thus, Africans generally have full perceptives, enlarged tuner in language, but retiring causality, and accordingly are deficient in reasoning capacity, yet have excellent memories and lingual and musical powers. Indians possess extraordinary strength of the propensities and perceptives, yet have no great moral or inventive power, and hence have very wide, round, conical, and rather low heads, but are large over the eyes. Finally, contrast the massive foreheads, all giant-minded men, Bacons, Franklins, Miltons, etc., with the low retiring foreheads of idiots. In short, every human, every brutal head is constructed throughout strictly on phrenological principles. Ransack air, earth, and water, and not one palpable exception ever has been, ever can be adduced. This wholesale view of this science precludes the possibility of mistake. Phrenology is therefore part and parcel of nature, a universal fact, not at all. Was phrenology science? Of course not. Unlike the works of Linnaeus and Blumenbach, at least phrenology achieved the status of theory from the time of its first postulation around 1790 in Vienna through the time of its final debunking in the 1890s. Phrenology was proven inadequate again and again. Systematic research validating its predictions were never performed, yet phrenology was still accepted as scientific evidence as to the superiority of whites and inferiority of blacks by those who looked for such rationalizations. Actually, a number of European anthropologists use it to claim European superiority over all other peoples on the planet. Not surprisingly, phrenology originated in Europe but was in vogue throughout the United States. The fallacy of intelligence testing. Linnaeus, Blumenbach, the founding fathers, phrenology. The effort continued in the United States throughout the 20th century with intelligence or IQ testing. Yes, intelligence testing originated in our country. At various times in the century, it was big business. In the 50s, 60s, and 70s, what's your IQ was a very popular question. Some industries used IQ to evaluate prospective employees. School systems use IQ to track students along academic and vocational paths. IQ was a very big deal. We are still testing people today. In fact, some researchers still use such testing as an effort to prove the superiority of one group of people over another. The amazing thing about all this testing is that IQ is a meaningless number, scientifically speaking. In The Mismeasure of Man by Stephen Jay Gould reviews the history of intelligence testing and discusses its problems. His work is quite fascinating, and I highly recommend reading it. It is important to understand Gould's work because IQ testing is widely accepted as science, just as Linnaeus' work was accepted as such in his day, and we must understand how little science was actually involved in its development. Intelligence testing is more or less the 20th century's version of phrenology. It all started with Alfred Binet, an educator in France at the turn of the century. He noticed that a few of his students would fall behind and wondered if he could create a test that would help him identify these students so he could give them more attention sooner. In his writings, he specifically cautioned readers not to think of his test as having anything to do with intelligence being, he believed, inherently immeasurable. In the early 1900s, a group of American social scientists disregarded Binet's warning, began modifying his test, and eventually concocted tests that they asserted measured intelligence. The end result of these concoctions was the Stanford Binet Intelligence Test, now SCALES, SCALES, the granddaddy of all IQ tests, the test all other IQ tests have been measured against for decades. Among the first people to be tested were Polish, Russian, Italian, and other Southern and Eastern European immigrants just getting off boats at Ellis Island. You can imagine what it must have been like for these people. They had just spent days cramped in the hold of the ship. They were tired, hungry, feeling the stress of arriving in a new country. Hopeful yet not certain how they would survive. Most, of course, did not speak English. They got off the ship and were herded toward a building where they were poked, prodded, and examined. In the midst of these medical examinations, they were given a test in a foreign language to measure their intelligence. How do you think they did? Needless to say, they did rather poorly. After tabulating the results, the scientists concluded that Poland, Russia, Italy, and other countries were sending us their least intelligent citizens, their dregs, DREGS. Did the Stanford Binet intelligence test actually measure intelligence? Almost certainly not. We cannot know for sure because the test was never validated. When we say a test is valid, we mean that the test, in fact, measures what the author says it's supposed to measure. In order to validate a test, one must compare the results of the test with actual objective outcomes in the real world. And herein lies the problem. Because there is no objective way to measure intelligence in the first place, it is impossible ever to validate such a test. So, even though the Stanford Binet intelligence test was never proved to be valid, its proponents continued to assert that they had a test of intelligence. They made such a good case, pseudoscientific though it was, that America was starting to buy into the concept of measuring intelligence. Since then, many different intelligence tests have been designed. The trouble remains, though, that we cannot know what any of these tests actually measure. So far, no intelligence test has ever been proven to measure intelligence. More important, these tests have little to no predictive value. They cannot accurately predict whether a person will be successful. They cannot accurately predict how much effort a person will put into living their life. They cannot even accurately predict how well a person will do in school. Pardon me. Pardon me. Yet for the better part of the last 100 years or so, There have been those who have used intelligence testing as a means to validate their superiority. Attention has been placed on the cultural bias of the test questions themselves. There is certainly evidence of that. More to the point, however, is that these tests, culturally biased or not, do not measure anything substantial. Why we persist in using them is much more a testament to good marketing than to good science. Linnaeus taxonomy, Jeffersonian reasoning, phonology, and IQ testing all served as scientific foundations upon which the institutions of slavery and racial superiority or inferiority were constructed. Since the time the first enslaved Africans arrived in the Americas in the early 1500s on the good ship Jesus, the first time you ever heard that name, the first time that name ever came up in history, to the present day, Europeans and their descendants have gone to great lengths to justify the 500 years of trauma and dehumanization they and their institutions produced. The effects of this trauma and dehumanization are observable today and can be explained by the theory of post-traumatic slave syndrome. That's all I'm going to do for this morning. I may get on here again, but again, check us out at www.kmtflix.com, kmetflix.com. February 1st, we will be at the Juneteenth headquarters for the second Black Buffalo Convention of the year, where we will come together and create resolutions and actions that we can take ourselves. We ain't waiting on no politicians. We ain't waiting on no religious leaders, none of that. We coming together as a community to figure it out and provide the solutions ourselves. I hope your today is great, your tomorrow is greater, and may fortune favor you. Peace.